Hello, and welcome to Higher Results, where business, workforce, and talent intersect. I'm Melody Reagan, CEO of Eye2Eye Workforce, and your host. And today we're here to talk about coaching, executive coaching, personal coaching, the thing that could delineate between your success and failure in your career. It's amazing how popular it's becoming. And I have an amazing panel with me today, some fantastic coaches. But before we jump into that, let me share with you that the coaching industry last year went to $1 billion in revenue. Pretty impressive, right? And today they estimate in the United States alone, we have 53,300 coaches. And truly, more and more organizations are bringing in coaches to enable their leaders to bring their best, to enable their workers to bring their best. And because careers are becoming ever more complex, guess what? We're looking for coaches for ourselves. Now, here's an interesting thing. We're going to jump in. There are a multitude of different kinds of coaches that bring different expertise. So with that, I'm going to introduce my panel today. Suzanne, thanks for being here. Tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you. So, Suzanne Levy. My company is Boulder Leadership, and I primarily focus on executive coaching and leadership coaching with the most senior level executives, whether in Fortune 500, middle market, or mature startups that are really escalating and scaling.
Fantastic. And Jennifer, please introduce yourself.
I'm Jennifer Cronenberg. My company is JMK Coaching and Consulting. And I work primarily with executives, entrepreneurs, and actually anyone who's looking to have more fulfillment in their life, to be more successful, and to have impact.
And by the way, one thing I'm going to add to that is you also work with athletes and performers.
I do.
Because you have that in your background too. So, and Steve, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Melody. My name is Steve Perry. My company is Sales Productivity Consultants. We're sales development strategists.
Awesome. So just so you guys know, this is going to be a two-part series, and we're going to jump in. I have a series of questions for my guests. So let's start off with, let's do a quick definition of what is a coach. Let's talk about that. What is a coach?
I think of a coach as someone who, in some ways, is one step behind people, such that they're helping and facilitating and shepherding people into their own success. They're not doing it for them. They're asking deep questions. They're helping people find their inner wisdom, being a mirror. I would start with that.
Fantastic. And what would you say, Steve?
Well, when we look at coaching, and again, I'm a sales development expert, and when we look at coaching, it's part of the development part of growing salespeople. And so when we look at development, there's holding people accountable to agreed upon goals. There's training, which is about awareness, knowledge, and skills. There's coaching, which helps people apply those skills. And then there's mentoring, which helps people model what it should look like. And as Suzanne was saying, coaching is really about letting people gain some self-awareness by asking great questions.
Awesome. And you know what, Jennifer, you and I have had this as a conversation. When should somebody consider getting a coach?
That's a great question. Personally, I think that you can consider getting a coach anytime if you want to be better at something. Do you absolutely need to have a coach? There's some controversy on that. And there's a great TED Talk by, I think his name is Atul Gawande, he was a surgeon, and he spoke about, if you want to be great at something, get a coach. And so I just really feel that if you're looking to hit your potential, if you're looking to be more successful, get a coach.
You know, knowing that you do coach athletes and performers, because you used to be one yourself, what I think is interesting is athletes have used coaches for years. We kind of take it for granted.
Yes.
But yet in business, somewhere we bought off on this idea we're supposed to do it alone, right? And, knowing, I can tell you going through the corporate ranks, I didn't know when I first became a director, what did it really mean to be a director? And when I first became a VP, what did it mean? What were the dynamics? And when you're out there, you've got to make every day, every moment count, and you have to deliver. And the other thing is you go further up in the organization, you become isolated. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty lonely place. So it's interesting to me that athletes, they know this. So, and elite athletes know this. You want to be an elite athlete in business? I'd say get a coach. Yes,
well, I would
Suzanne?
distinguish something that, and you can vouch for this, that there's coaches in the in the athletics that you do, but they also get personal coaches.
Yes, they do.
So that's distinct from what people think of as an athletic coach.
Well, let's do this for a second. There's a lot of confusion. What's the difference between a personal coach, a life coach, an executive coach? What would you say?
Well, executive coaching obviously focuses on the executives. You're with high impact people. They need to be at the top of their game, and they need the support. Like you said, sometimes they have blind spots. Sometimes they feel very isolated. They have no one they can be confidential with. And so, support and the leadership and all that. Consultants, they will come in and they will look at what's the problem. They'll fix it oftentimes, give the solution, if you will, whereas a coach doesn't. A coach comes in, a really good coach, will evoke that wisdom from within the client and will allow them to step up higher and higher and higher through that. And then I guess what life coaching, the personal coaching, that I do a good bit of that as well. That looks very holistically at a person's life in terms of their career, their relationships, their health, whatever's going on in their life. And it doesn't have to be an executive, it doesn't have to be an entrepreneur. What I will say though is that when you're working with executives, usually it becomes very holistic because an executive needs to be looking at their health, their relationships, all the parts of their life in order to be more effective.
To vouch for that, there was a recent article in the Harvard Business Review about how executives spend their time, CEOs specifically. And when you're monitoring the time and how you're getting the most out of your day, you're looking holistically. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting family time? Are you working out in addition to everything that you do every day? So, Suzanne, do you want to add a little more to that?
And yes, because I think that's completely accurate, because people will say, well, is this about my life? And I think when people further distinguish between executive, business, sales, and life, sometimes it's also the environment within which they've come to you, right? So a lot of times executive coaching, it might even come through the corporation or a company. They've actually hired someone to work with you. And that in itself has a unique relationship you have to build. Often people are coming like it's a breath of fresh air because thank goodness that they have someone to talk to. I think in business coaching, it can be small business. And I think in some cases, there's a fine line I find in executive coaching, which I always explain to people, is that while we're not consultants, we have to be careful that when you're working in an industry or a certain type of company, they do want to feel like you know something. You don't have to have worked in their business, but they need to hear a little bit of language that you understand their world. And sometimes you can just get that from them. So sometimes that lends itself to executive or even business coaching.
You know what that leads to, and I'm actually going to put you on the spot with this one, Steve, is does a coach have to have inline experience? So, for example, you're coaching somebody who's a salesperson. Do you, to be an effective coach, have to have been in sales?
Well, it certainly is helpful to know the context. When we look at coaching, it's much more targeted, perhaps, than some of the other coaching we're talking about. When we look at folks, it's basically if people aren't hitting their quota, which is one of the metrics we look at, it's either because they don't know what to do, in which case we give them training, or they know what to do and they can't or won't do it. And that's where coaching comes in, is helping people really understand what's going on inside of themselves and understand why they're not doing it. And I think the same with any kind of coaching, the biggest thing we deal with is fear. It's what's going on between the ears and helping people recognize what it is they're not doing. So it certainly helps. I mean, my belief is that you have to have a clear defined sales process. You can't manage without that. And so having some knowledge about that certainly helps. But really, a lot of the work that I do is sales therapy. Is helping people understand why they're not doing what they should be doing.
By the way, though, you're going to get me to another question. But before I get to that other question, one of the things that I see is you gain experience as a coach working with multiple executives, for example. Like I know Suzanne has worked with some Fortune 2000 companies, and she brings a perspective that others wouldn't have through all of the coaching that you've done. By the same token, Jennifer, you are a 3-time serial entrepreneur. And being able to bring that experience to bear, I think, goes a long way. So having the experience, and it's what you said, pulling it out. Now let's talk about therapy. When should somebody actually, because there's a line, when should somebody maybe get a coach versus being in therapy?
Well, I think it's interesting because I've talked to a number of people who are therapists who have started coaching businesses.
They have.
Because they feel that gives them more latitude.
Yes.
But when we really start getting to a point of depth where we're dealing with psychology, then I refer them to someone who's a psychologist, someone who's a therapist, because that's an area I don't want to go. I mean, we want to go deep, we want to understand, but I'm not equipped to give people that kind of deep therapy.
Well, and I'd love your thoughts on this one, Jennifer, because at Eye to Eye, we work with leadership teams on culture, et cetera, and inherent in that is coaching too, but not at the level that the three of you do it. We work with a variety of different clients, and what's important to me is we bring experience. It's like we have experience working with it. Therapists, they have experience being a therapist, but there's a different thing when I'm trying to figure out how I navigate all the politics with my board, right? Kind of a different thing. So where's that line for you, Jennifer?
It's a moving line. And what I would say is that when I sense that someone is dealing with something, like Steve said, so deep, perhaps it's coming from their youth, it's a blockage that they have that would require a skill set that I do not have, I will absolutely refer them out. Not to say that in coaching, you don't get really present with people and ask them, what is that? What's that coming up right now? It's usually a fear. That's something that is a bit of therapy, but it's within the realm of coaching. In relationships too, if I sense that something's going on really deep, I am not a marriage counselor. Whereas coaching, and I've seen this happen many times, can save marriages. It is miraculous. There are times where you just know this is in an area that a specialist, a therapist who is trained can take care of it. Or if there's the case of needing medication, refer them out.
Fantastic. You have comments about that, Suzanne?
Well, I think I would add, I would take everything that both of you are saying. My mom was a therapist, so I would hear things that were much deeper. And I think there's that point, I've experienced people where I will ask if I'm noticing depression or anxiety. And I'll tune in and start to ask if they're already working with someone, if they're on medication, because I also want to normalize it, what they might already be doing. And I listen if I do refer them on, which is important.
Fantastic.
Is also listen for what is the work you're doing there? Will it support? Do we need to incorporate any of it?
So it's really important when you are selecting a coach or working with a coach, they're not your end-all be-all to everything. I want to share with you what a coach can do. So let's talk about some of the ways coaches can help. Suzanne, what are some ways, what would be triggers or what are ways that I could look to elevate my game? How can you help me?
Well, I think first I listen for your beliefs. I'm going to just listen to how you're talking about how you're dealing with people. And I like to go in being willing to be fired. So I'm going to challenge you and say things back to you that you probably never heard. And so we'll listen for self-talk. I recently had a C-level person who the first conversation was all this negative self-talk. And I said, we're going to stop right here. This is done. We're done with this. And here's what you're going to start doing. And she listens differently. And so that has changed the whole trajectory of who she's going to be as a leader. So I'm listening to everything you're saying and every sigh as part of the dialogue. So that would be the first thing.
By the way, you have a tagline that I really love that's in your signature, and it is?
It's Tom Landry, who is the Cowboys coach, and it says, a coach is someone who shows you what you don't want to see, tells you what you don't want to hear, so you can be the best that you can be. And I really follow that. I am willing to get in there. And I think I've been called the velvet hammer, where I'll go in sort of smooth, but say it and call someone on their BS, but also from that place of support. And it's a challenge, and challenge people's thinking and try on new ideas. I think we also give, besides helping people with new perspective, is tools. Actually saying, have you ever actually had a conversation where you might start with an observation? Here's a concern I have, and now a request. And all of a sudden, people have a way to have different kinds of conversations. And it's mind-blowing.
Fantastic. How about you, Jennifer? How can a coach help somebody? What are different impacts that you can have?
Oh, there are so many ways. Sometimes just having assessments to start off with and have a baseline of where someone's at. They don't really know where they're at. Like Suzanne said, being able to say those hard truths to someone because nobody else will, but you love them so much, you care so greatly about them reaching the outcomes that they have stated that they want, that you're willing to get fired if need be. Asking really powerful questions that they don't take time to reflect on. And they're the kind of questions that could change the entire trajectory, not just of their career, but of their life. That can be incredibly transformational. So, and the accountability too. Just having a coach in your life who is going to make you accountable for what you say you're dedicated to and that you will do. It can be really powerful.
Fantastic. All right. Well, tell me, what can a coach do? So you're in sales. Tell me what you can do.
I'm just thinking that I have it really easy compared to these folks. Typically I'm working with sales leaders, and they're frustrated because they're not hitting the numbers that they want to hit, or they're doing great, they're overachieving goals and want that to continue over time, and they're not getting it. And so there's just some very basic rules. Number one is you got to hire the right people. Get a company like yours as well, and hire the right people in there, hold them accountable to agreed upon goals, and then you've got to develop them. And if you've got the right people, you hold them accountable to agreed upon goals, and you let them know you're going to help them grow through training, coaching, and mentoring, they're going to grow. And being a former second grade school teacher, my belief is that anyone can learn anything if they want to. And so what I do is easy, but what's interesting is I frequently, a leader of a company will call me in and say, my salespeople suck. And where we typically go to is who hired those salespeople, who's managing it. It's usually the CEO's problem, and it goes back to them. But it takes them a while to recognize what the issue is.
By the way, that's a little bit of those life-changing questions, right? Questions, you guys do an awful lot of asking the right questions.
When I think about when you look at the work that I do as a coach, which is kind of a sales manager in a sense, it's very much like selling. Because in sales, it's all about asking the right questions. Your prospects will tell you how to sell them if you ask the right questions. And I think one of the problems that we have in management is that we keep wanting to tell people something. And so my rule, when we talk about athletics, the coach of a football team, they'll be holding people accountable, they'll be training, they'll be coaching, they'll be mentoring, all within a 5-minute span, depending on what the requirements are. So there's times when we need to develop people, we need to give them awareness, knowledge, and skills that they don't know. But if they're not applying it, they have to recognize why they're not applying it. They have to own that. And our job is to help them figure that out.
Fantastic.
I was going to add something to the kinds of questions and the way that we listen as coaches, and I think it lends itself to some of the other questions we might talk about is, a coach also, if they're listening for something and they ask a question, we can also sort of just change a word, and the question can come out differently and elicit a different response. So if someone's stuck, I know sometimes I'm just asking, what is the question? What can be channeled through to ask that? And I think also in coaching, there's a lot of talk of different levels of listening. And so when you've been doing it a long time and you really, really hone in on they call it level 3, let's call it, it's as if you're in a whole different plane with people. So you're not just asking obvious questions, you're almost somatically feeling everything that's happening. And something might come to you that feels almost irrelevant, but you'll throw it out there and it might be exactly what was needed.
So I'm going to ask each of you for this first part of our 2-part series Share with us a successful coaching arrangement. Now you impacted somebody. And this should give each of you some ideas on how you can use a coach. So, Steve, share with us what's been a successful coaching engagement for you?
Well, the one that comes to mind was one that took a bit of time. I was working with a radio station, a series of radio stations, and there was someone that was from sales who was made a sales manager. And I was really helping her figure out how to move from that sales role to a management role. And we worked together for about 3 years. And she grew tremendously to the point where at one point she was made general manager of a radio station in that group down in the Springs. And a few years later, she was made CEO of a company here in Denver.
Cool.
So it's amazing the transformation you can get, but it can't happen unless they get it. Mm-hmm. And I remember really clearly there was one concept it took her 3 years to get. And I couldn't tell her. She had to get it.
And she did.
She did.
Fantastic. All right. So, Jennifer, tell us about a successful coaching engagement.
I'm going to bring forward one that I know you're not going to because you're in that executive space, but this is in a performing artist realm. And a ballerina. I was a ballerina in another life, my first career. And was a ballerina in Miami who retired about 2.5 years ago and wasn't sure what she could do. And we started working together, and she decided she wanted to build her own company. This is not easy, to have your own ballet company. It's really very, very difficult. There's fundraising, there's bringing together a team, the dancers, it's like
starting a business.
Without a whole lot of money or skills, right? Because ballerinas are these honed instruments that they don't get business school, they don't get, right? So just recently, they went on a tour. They've been successful in America and abroad. And the New York Times did a review of them and said, this is a company to watch, and it may very well change American ballet.
Oh, wow.
What a privilege to be on that journey with her and her husband. So it's just a great story. Wow. Yeah.
By the way, what that brings to mind for me, sometimes if you're starting a business, one of the things that I've watched people do is they go get partners because they need support or they want somebody so that they're not doing it alone. And that's not necessarily, if you're going to go for a partner in your business, pick somebody who's bringing value to the business. And instead, if you don't have somebody who's going to do that, get a coach. Coach can help you in that journey so that you're not starting that business alone. Great example. All right, Suzanne, how about you?
Okay, I'm trying to pick one, but I think one I like is I worked with a VP that was on his way to be an SVP, and he'd been passed over for many promotions. And the one thing they kept telling him was, you're too assertive. No matter what level you're working with, you're intimidating and too assertive. He'd had assessments and internal coaching. So when I started working with him, the thing we looked at was his background. Where might this messaging or this body language come from? And he came from a diversity background. He was raised, his dad was chief of police. So we realized that how he was walking into rooms metaphorically was like fists up. And so I had him do his eulogy because I believe the greatest leaders are, it's where you're sourced. That makes your authentic leadership. And in that, he talked about, there was a poem of bringing people across a bridge. And he's a spiritual man. So jokingly, but not, I said, how would Jesus walk into the room? I just imagine, I'm Jewish, but I imagine that he's arms open, not like this. And that changed everything. And we started using WWJD. Yeah. He started listening differently. He got promoted to a global role. And then he was recruited for a C-level role to one company after another. And that is just a pleasure. Not that his fist didn't ever start to go, but who he truly wanted to be in the world was someone that helped people, that made a difference.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here today. Now we've got a part 2 that's going to be coming. We're going to want you to come back. We have a part 2 on coaching. And what we're going to talk about in our next session is how you go about selecting a coach and managing your relationship with the coach so that you get the most out of it. What should you pay for a coach? What's your schedule? So join us. Thank you for being on Higher Results with us today. And you can see us every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Mountain Time on Facebook.com/Higher Results. And if you miss a show, no worries. Come check us out on eye2eyeworkforce.com/Higher-Results. And you've got a fantastic library of all of our great shows. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we'll see you online.